But let me suggest to you this. Imagine in the not too far future, might be 5 years, might be 10 years, when the robots are doing a lot of the work. And let's say you've got a situation that for every 10 people who could work, there are only 7 decent jobs. And the other jobs, they're barely worth doing because by the time you paid for your child care, let's say, and your commute, it just wouldn't be worth the job. So for every 10 people, there are only 7 jobs that are worth doing. Who do you want doing the 7 jobs? Do you want the 7 jobs to be done by people who want those jobs? Because the people working are going to have more resources, more pay, a happier life than the people who are just getting a universal basic income. Don't you want the 7 out of 10 who want to work to be doing the work? Why would you ever want someone who is unwilling to work to have one of those few jobs? They're not going to do much of a job, and they're not going to be happy about it. So if they're not happy they have the job, and you're not happy they have a job, why do they have a job? All right? So the first thing you have to understand is that it's tough to sort out somebody who can't work from someone who's unwilling. In a practical sense, anybody who is unwilling will simply claim they're incapable. They'll say, I've got a mental problem. They'll say, I've got anxiety. They're going to say a lot of things. And so in a practical sense, you almost can't sort out who is unable to work from someone who claims they're unable to work. Those would be the unwilling. Now, what about the people who could work, but the only jobs available are such a long commute and would require so much child care expense that it's not worth working if the alternative is to get this universal basic income? So we might be very close to a time when universal basic income is a thing because the robots are doing all the low-level jobs and there just aren't enough good jobs. So somebody has to be the unworking group. And we're not going to let them starve, probably, just because there aren't enough jobs. So the socialist version is that rather than forcing people to work, you just go with the situation, which is there aren't enough jobs, and I'd rather have people willing to work and willing to make more money by working than getting universal basic income. All right, so that's one vision of it. And by the way, I'm not saying you should buy this. I'm not talking you into it. I'm just saying that when you first see the idea of paying people who are unwilling to work, it sounds frickin' crazy, doesn't it? It goes against everything you know about capitalism. It goes against everything you know about incentives. But I almost can guarantee you that there's an intellectual argument for a world that's starting to enter the robot age, where very smart capitalists have said to themselves, we should at least test this idea of universal basic income. And the reality is we're not going to be able to sort out the difference between people who are unwilling to work and the people who just say they're unwilling, we can't sort out who's incapable from who's unwilling, because part of your health is your mental health. And anybody can claim, I'm just not mentally able, or I just can't do these jobs. So you might as well just say, all right, doesn't matter if you're unable or unwilling. If you would rather have a very low level of life, that's an option. But anybody who wants to work can have a much better life. That's the payoff for working. So you are certainly welcome to say, I'm still not sold on that idea. The only thing I'm trying to sell you on is that there's probably a larger intellectual economic argument that's not crazy. All right? That's the only point I'm trying to make. There probably is a larger context and argument that's not crazy. It might be wrong. You might not agree with it. Reasonable people might disagree. But I guarantee you, there's a larger argument that's not so crazy. But it would have been crazy to include it in the draft as a bullet point, or even really in the final plan, because it's such a lightning rod. It's too easy to argue against it because we're all primed for incentives and capitalism and all that stuff. So to me, the most likely explanation of what happened is that there was at least one person, as far as we know, it would only take one person to insert that into a draft because people had talked about it. And they thought it was maybe a good idea to start floating out there, getting us ready for a world where this is going to happen. So universal basic income is almost certainly going to happen. I would say that we're almost guaranteed that in my lifetime, somebody's going to be getting a universal basic income in the world of robots. The universal basic income is designed to give you a minimum survivable life. How many people would accept a minimum survivable life? Probably a lot. It seems to me that all of the important things that happen in society that move things forward come from a very small group of people. There's a small group of entrepreneurs, risk takers, geniuses who do all the cool stuff. So I would say the top 2% of the performers have this hugely larger impact on the world than all the 98% below in terms of big change. How important are the, let's say, lowest 20% of performers to the overall success of the world? Compare the top 2% who are really moving and shaking and inventing to the bottom 20% who you kind of wish they wouldn't even show up for work. All right? Have you ever worked in an office where you looked around and you said to yourself, if the worst 20% of my coworkers would call in sick every day, we'd really get something done? So when you're saying to yourself, oh no, I can't live in a world where, let's say, the bottom 10% or 20% of people unwilling to work just get a check, the alternative is they probably work for your company and slow you down. They're not the ones who are making the world move forward. So you're probably not going to be as damaged by it as you think, so long as there was still plenty of incentive to work. Right? The only people who are not going to work are the people who weren't going to add much to the world anyway. I raised my family. I won't pay for anyone unwilling to work. I'm not saying it will ever be popular. UBI will make everybody poorer. Well, let me ask you this. Don't we have lots of people who are receiving services for nothing right now? We have an entire elderly class who are receiving more money than they put in with Social Security. Now, would you end that? Would you end Social Security because so many old people are taking out of it more than they put in? They're effectively getting paid by you for not working. So there's a lot of stuff you get used to, and you'll probably get used to UBI, even though it sounds like a terrible idea from today's perspective.